should have counted myself. I can't see myself, okay. Okay, I'll call the meeting to order. And may I ask the Vice Chairman to do a roll call, please? Ellis isn't going to be here this evening.
All right, we'll just go down.
Bernie Pigeon,
Dave Hurd.
Stuart Novick.
Jerry Stefanski.
Glenn Lawrence.
all present and accounted for. Any citizen participation this evening? We have a citizen here. No, she's not going to step up, okay?
Well, she will if we get out of line.
I think she'll have something to say, yes. First item, Finance Committee matters, is the review of the town meeting and the processes. Principally, the meeting is to just voice our own viewpoints of how things progressed, and if we found any problems that perhaps we could solve amongst ourselves in some way. Anybody want to go first?
I'll just say that it seems that we're getting the information for town meeting later and later each year. And it becomes more and more difficult for everybody involved. The moderator, the selectmen, the finance committee, because we want to look at things carefully. The idea of the finance committee is to try to ask all those questions that anybody in town might ask and have answers for it. And if it's coming late, it's very difficult to do that. Not quite sure what the answer is and how we do it, but getting information after the warrant's been published or gone to print makes it very difficult.
I agree, I'm not sure there's much we can do with that.
You want to say, you speak your piece, Jerry, come on.
I thought that I was put in a position to make decisions that I did not have time to think about. I don't think that any of us on the committee should be there in that. And if we don't, my opinion, if we don't get the information on time, we should pass on it with no opinion. And because getting information 1 hour before the meeting and expecting us to be able to discuss, well, first, to be able to read it through and think about it, then discuss it. 1 hour before the town meeting it shouldn't be that way. It's just expecting something from a finance committee. I don't think that the town voters or the bylaws would anticipate. And we just, if we can't change the time frame of when the warrant is made, then what we should do is just pass, okay? Give ourselves, if the time the warrant is printed, that's the end of our decision. We make a vote then. Anything that comes in after the fact, except for reoccurring items, we just pass. I feel comfortable in doing that.
Mhm.
I don't know how much people in the town actually rely upon what we have to say, but the downside to that is who are we punishing? It's not gonna cause people to get us information any sooner. And while it's hard to make up our mind in a short period of time, if people actually listen to what we say, on the assumption that we make reasonable decisions, even if it's short, I think it's beneficial to the town. If they don't pay attention to what we do, which I don't know, it probably doesn't matter. But it will, I don't believe it's gonna make anybody get us information any sooner.
Glenn, do you have an opinion?
We should tell them it starts a week earlier than it actually starts.
Well, and when Jerry said it, to say, to build on that, we didn't have the opportunity, but the town meeting as a whole doesn't have an opportunity for anyone to give them advice on those issues either. And they are less informed than we are. And in fact, there were two people there on one of the zoning issues who were discussing the fact of how it would affect them and they're discussing it on the floor of town meeting, which more appropriately should have been at one of the meetings or the hearings. But the issues were constantly changing. Even after a hearing, something different was happening. Now, the purpose of the hearing is to gain more information. But there should be at least enough time for that information to be incorporated, and the people who were there or interested at least have an opportunity to review it before we get to town meeting, so they can be informed. The whole purpose is trying to make informed decisions. And I was going over the bylaws. There is nothing in the charter, or bylaws, excuse me, that give any kind of a time frame other than when the meeting is called and when the warrant is closed. And as far as the selectmen are concerned, they can accept anything and everything that is submitted to them that they approve to place on the warrant. Now, the most frustrating thing are these placeholder articles, which means they're incomplete. Now, it's no surprise that we're gonna have a town meeting at a certain date. The warrant has to close at a certain date, so one would hope they would take note of that and try to finish their own deliberations prior to that date, so that others, in case the finance committee, since we are charged specifically with reviewing all the articles, most importantly, of course, those that are financial. But even the words are such that this is a time requirements. The Board of Selection place on the warrant for the spring and fall town meetings all subjects which have been submitted to it in accordance with provisions of this article. That's all. So it is up to them if they want to refuse to accept incomplete articles. They don't. I got into a discussion with Patrick about precedent, and it's inconvenient and inappropriate to ask those of us who are all volunteers in this operation, but to those of us to try to do our job responsibly. I mean, we're all professional people sitting here. This whole table, when it's here, we're all professional people, and we know in our business lives how we conduct business. And we would like to have at least treated with respect and dignity, that we have an opportunity to discharge our responsibilities. But, as pointed out, I don't think we have any recourse that can cause something to happen without disrupting the whole process to begin with, or alienating the relationships we have with the various committees.
But Jerry's correct, if we don't have enough information, and we did that this time. There were several articles that we did not vote on until the day of the meeting when we got the final information. And there was some that we debated and changed our minds on because we didn't have sufficient information at various meetings. We don't have the information, but also the town meeting doesn't. People who are actually making those votes. And we want to make sure that they have sufficient information to make informed decisions. And that's important. It's important for us, but it's also important for everyone sitting out there raising their hand and saying yay or nay.
I don't think it's gonna change unless if somebody doesn't get the information of the various committees in a timely fashion, they can't get the article on the warrant. That would change things, but yeah, I don't know how that happens.
Well, I think an interpretation, Claire, if you jump in here, possibly that the selectmen have the ability to refuse placing something on the warrant. They're not required that everything is submitted to them will end up on the warrant. So they could, if in their judgment, say it is incomplete and inappropriate.
But they get something, and then a long period of time can go by, and we just don't get the information we need from who's ever sponsoring that article.
Well, they even know ahead of time that these articles are incomplete.
Yeah,
At
but
that point in time.
if it's many, many weeks in advance, they might reasonably assume that it'll be complete in time to inform everybody that needs to be informed.
The unfortunate part is that the department heads that oftentimes advise these committees, Ken, I'll use that as an example, I mean, he's done his work months in advance, and it's up to the committee to schedule a hearing or a meeting regarding those subjects, and they don't do it for whatever reason, and I'm sure, I've watched the planning board in particular, and they'll go to 10:30 at night, and and he's got the cleaning guy knocking on the door, you know, sticking his head in just to remind them, hey, time, gotta clock up here.
Well, they have a lot to, some of the committees have a lot on their table, and they're trying to accomplish a lot, and, you know, I think that there are two things. Number one, there are petition articles, which have to go on by law. Once a petition is made to the selectmen, that has to be put in the warrant. And then there are articles that come up through the various departments. I think the budgets are done well. Those come up, except for free cash. And, most of that comes up ahead of time. We have a chance to look at that, which is good. The zoning articles are always contentious, and I think the planning board just has to make a determined effort to go and hold the hearings as soon as they have the write-ups put together, so that they can be reviewed and incorporate people's comments, and if they're going to make changes, make the changes, but get them done before town meeting.
Indeed, and I don't fault them for their slow deliberations, because oftentimes, whatever they consider can not just affect that particular paragraph that they're talking about, but can have some other effect on different bylaws and zoning
Oh, yes.
regulations. But to build on some of the issues here, as far as the schedule we have, that I make, that, you know, like 3 to 4 weeks before, we have all the information, so we can go to the press, so we have it in the, available to the public a week before.
Right.
According to the bylaw, we're required to have it that night, the night of town meeting. And that's wholly inappropriate if we're to advise town meeting,
Right.
because we like to get the information out there, how we have deliberated, and
You know, here's my take. We as a finance committee are able to get that warrant printed and on the tables outside the town meeting on time. If we can do stuff on time, other committees can and should. And moving the dates down to, instead of October, November, it won't matter. So, if we can do it, I guess if we do it, why can't others do it? And if they can't, then they need to start their meetings earlier and go longer. Jesus, this is not, you know, rocket science here. You got a deadline and you work to the deadline and you get it done. Are you gonna go in and tell the towns, oh, hell, you know, I didn't have time to get it printed? No, it's not acceptable. Some things are not acceptable. And not getting us information so we can make a thought-through decision is just not acceptable. We may not be able to change anything, but it's still not acceptable.
I think your original suggestion that if they're incomplete by a certain date, they will not have a recommendation from the finance committee. And we'll state so, that we had just insufficient information, they were unprepared for us. And I think it's reasonable to do so, because we, as mentioned, we're all professionals, we know what the job has to do, we know how to do it. And if we're not given an opportunity to, I think we should speak up as a committee.
It's thrown down on us, that we take it for granted. We're the last people, you know? Throw it to them 5 minutes before meeting and let them deal with it. No, it's not right.
I think it's, it almost to the level of insulting to ask the town meeting to make such decisions, because they're the board of directors. And they make the broad decisions of how all the money's gonna be spent, how it's gonna affect the way of conducting business, how programs on the school side are being presented and all, what they have monies to do. And to suggest that those, well, in this case, 450 people got together with no information at all and have to make that kind of decision. I mean, we won't make that kind of decision in our own families.
What happened to the printing? There was two different versions of an article out there, wasn't there?
Because of the changes.
Yes,
Yeah,
we
so
reached one that
is-
night.
Why? Should that have even happened? and it's because of last minute stuff.
Hmm.
Yeah, it just, something's wrong.
Well, I like
Confront
your,
it.
your comments initially, how we get it done, so we can serve as a model committee.
Right.
There you go.
But I mean,
How
when you
many
think of
years
it,
didn't we get it done? Never, except, well, go back 10 years or 12. But the point is, we get it done every year. I mean, when I say get it done, I mean you get the article printed on time. And there's 9 of us. So if you can get 9 of us together to get the job done, certainly with committees of less than 9, 7 or 5 or 3 can get their job done. And you have more meetings than once a month, or once every other week, or more than 2 hours. Or you actually distribute the minutes of the meeting beforehand so that when everyone gets there, they can vote on the minutes rather than having it take the first half hour to read the minutes. It can be done.
oh, indeed, I think all of us in our professional world has done it. In the sense if we have an issue that comes up, it's important, and we have a afternoon meeting where we all get to go home, well, we don't wait till next month to continue on. We do it either the next day or we schedule it next week, whatever it is. We get
So,
to things.
so from a practical point of view, why don't we just tell people before the next town meeting, all these committees, whoever's got a warrant, if you can't get us the information by X date, we're going to pass and not make a recommendation on this. And then see what happens. And if it's effective, great. If it isn't, we'll try to come up with something else. I don't know what else we can do.
I would agree.
And maybe we should put together a letter, and maybe, I mean, some things we can vote on at the last minute, but maybe we should say, a letter to the various department heads or groups saying
for
that we do
example-
need the information.
Yeah, for example, the change, because they wrote it illegally the first time on what this overlay district was gonna be. I mean, I don't think any of us actually knew what the hell was going on when we voted for that. I mean, you can't,
No,
it's complicated stuff. So
And there's
that-
always
that's just
issues.
unacceptable.
Yeah, there's always issues that are gonna be exception, but I think, yes, we'll see if we can put something together that implies the need for greater expediency, but that in a spirit of cooperation, we'd like to have things done a little earlier so we could accomplish our own task.
We would appreciate you not putting us in a position of having to meet 1 hour before a town meeting to make decisions.
We'd appreciate you doing your
Yeah,
job.
yeah.
Yeah, you have to expand the phrase, if you can't shake it off the pot, into a whole paragraph.
Mhm.
I think we have an attorney on the board that can probably do that with some lovely flourishes.
Yeah, my job was always to get it down to that short phrase.
Yes,
I was going to, but
come on up and join us.
I have the same frustrations that you have. When I'm hit at the day of town meeting, changes to motion 3 or 4 times on one article. When I'm hit at 5 minutes to 7 with changes. It's frustrating. It's very difficult to do your job, and you're put in an awkward position of having to look at something when everything else is going on and trying to come to a reasonable solution of how you're gonna do this. I wish I had made some copies for you, but you can go online. Other towns do it. And this is what's so frustrating to me as a town moderator. Other towns do their warrant well in advance with all of the information available to the taxpayer. The town of Marion had a special town meeting the very same night that we did. All of their dollar figures are in here. All of their bylaws are printed in the warrant, and the people get this mailed to them at least 2 weeks in advance to every household. There are towns who are so well organized that somebody gets up on the floor from the finance committee and makes a motion that we will accept every article except 3, 9, 14, and 16 as printed in the warrant, because they have everything together, it's done, there's no question about it, and then they go back and talk about the 3 or 4 that need a discussion. I've tried for 9 years. I haven't come up with a better solution. I've voiced my frustration that, there's no reason why it has to wait till the last minute. And I totally agree with you. If it's not ready to go on, the Board of Selectmen shouldn't put it on, and I say that to them all the time. If it's not ready, don't put it on. Your department heads will learn after a while. There were several articles that we threw into a consent agenda because they were just placeholders, knowing that they weren't gonna be ready. It's a waste of people's time. It's just really, really frustrating to me as a moderator, that at 5 minutes of 7, the town administrator is out trying to work out a solution with somebody over an article. Should have happened a month earlier. They knew about it, they talked about it. Well, what are we gonna do? And nobody stepped up to the plate to do it. So I'm just as frustrated as you are, but it can be done, and I don't know what the solution is, other than maybe a bylaw. Maybe come up with a warrant article for a bylaw, that everything must be to the finance committee by such and such a date. Period.
I'll have to check on it. I brought this out because I brought this. This is what I used to do in Stoughton, and that's the warrant as produced. The articles that were on the warrant are the motions.
Yeah.
They're written, Mass General laws, blah, 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 and all that stuff.
Yeah.
When your warrant is closed, the articles are the motions.
That's what the motion.
We didn't have anything different that was
Yeah.
projected up on a screen.
And no handouts. No handouts. A lot of
Yeah.
towns, I don't know of any other town that uses handouts like we do.
I'll double check with the bylaws, see if they had anything. But it was a lot of cooperation, because after the warrant closed and it went to the finance committee, there were no other hearings by other committees that were being held. It was done, but it does take an awful lot of cooperation on everybody's part.
Well, why don't we, we've got time, let's have a discussion with the Board of Selectmen and see if we can get them to say to people, if this isn't done by X date, we're not gonna accept it, it's not gonna get on the warrant. If they won't do that, let's draft a bylaw amendment requiring the putting in deadlines.
Yeah.
And, they won't reject it because they accept everything else.
Yeah.
And we'll see what happens.
The town of Marion, this is what they vote on. They don't have, this is their motion. The selectmen will read it, and then generally the finance director is the one who answers questions, but other towns do it.
Yeah.
Because I
Other
used to
towns
read
do
the
it.
motions, or I read the articles, which were the motions at the town meetings that I had in Stoughton, and I just read right off the warrant that was produced. That was everything right there. There was no rewriting. It can be done, yes, you're right, it can be done. If it can be done an hour before, it could have been done 2 months before.
Mhm. And in terms of planning board articles, now, one of the articles that came up, I think the first hearing was August 13th. September, October, 60 days. And when did the planning board get the final copy? The week before town meeting, even though the original hearing was 2 months before. The other thing I find, a lot of the articles that are written as is on file with the town clerk, and technically, those things should be on file the day the warrant is posted, and oftentimes they're not. It's frustrating.
It's becoming more and more lackadaisical in that, we've done that before, it'll work out, we'll do it.
With the editors, we can go back and fix it.
Right.
We can go back and fix it. Well, I don't know, I was brought up, do it right the first time, and don't do it at all.
Well, collectively, there's a group that finds that's a convenience to be able to go back and do it later, correct it. They get there something initially.
But, aside from the controversial nature of the particular article, there was a massive confusion at the town meeting over which was the correct motion. People just didn't know. You remember?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And that's just ridiculous.
Yeah, what
Isn't-
happened was that
I didn't know.
they had a hearing on August 13th. There was no structured bylaw handed to the planning board. It was just, here's what we think we want to do. And that was not even filed with the town clerk until August 30th. And that was just a paper saying, here's what we're thinking about. So when the warrant closed on September 14th or 15th, thereabouts, that first paper is what was on file. So technically, that's what you were voting on,
Hmm.
Right.
okay? So that's what you had in your handbook here. Then they had a public meeting on October 4th, and they came up with a more structured bylaw. However, things came up at that meeting that made them open their eyes a little bit and said, well, now we gotta go change it. So they had filed that one on October 4th, but then they went October 11th and turned in a third one, and that's what your handout was. So obviously, you had gone to print with the other two versions, and yet what was being voted on was the third version.
And the fact that we went to print by copier was convenient for them because they could afford to take the extra week.
Right, and that bylaw should have been available on the night of the first hearing, August 13th.
And in the notes that I had 3 versions of it. And the latest one, or the last one, was the 22nd.
Right.
That was the day we voted.
Yeah.
It was the day of town meeting.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, I got calls on the Thursday before town meeting, from a member of the planning board. They had voted a certain way and wanted to know if we hold a meeting at 6 o'clock on Monday night, can we go in and change that warrant article? And I will admit, my temper was a little short, and I said, no, I won't accept it. You know, don't come in at 6:45 and hand me something that changes a zoning article that I have to look at and read and understand and decide whether it fits in that scope of what the warrant article is.
What I think is absent from what I read in the bylaws is an appropriate notice, sufficient notice phraseology. Because that in itself is ambiguous, but it can later on in the language become more specific as to what is sufficient notice. Define it. And once it's defined in one section of the bylaws, it applies to all the others. Sufficient notice can be 10 days.
Well, we could write something that just says, if you're gonna submit an article, this is what it is. It has to be done by this date, that's it. No further changes unless somebody in town meeting makes a motion to amend it.
And it can always be amended on the floor
Mhm.
if it needs to be. But I totally agree with you. I think it was a very frustrating meeting in terms of not having what we needed to have done and ready.
Well, I think they flagrantly treated the town meeting with disrespect in doing that.
As well as the moderator.
Oh, indeed. I mean,
No, no kidding.
but I would go with what you suggest, to have a bylaw, because I know we meet with the selectmen. Patrick, that's a hot button, because I encountered him in Derek's office, and I suggested that shouldn't happen. Oh, that's precedent. I said, that's not the legal term of precedent.
No. No.
I think
Now,
in the
Claire, that was
absence-
locked for a reason.
Oh, sorry, wait a minute, let me back out. Let me walk out.
That's okay, it's a legal meeting. I don't think it's that difficult, but.
We can try it. Obviously, there can be exceptions, and obviously amendments can be made on the town meeting floor.
Indeed.
So if they have to be changed, they can be done.
But all the committees are appointed, including ourselves, of course, but all the other committees are appointed by the selectmen. so they're responsible to the selectmen. And so I think Jerry's suggesting we get together with the selectmen and discuss the issue first, and lacking or getting kind of cooperation, hoping to go that route first. And then, if it doesn't happen, I'll explore the possibilities of going through the bylaw to become more specific.
It's a way forward, I suggest we do it.
Yeah,
We've got plenty of time.
We got plenty of time to get it on a warrant, huh?
We
actually
do it the day of, so.
We actually do.
well, I think too, it gives us time, because we're developing, we have our own schedule in there, which we're asking everybody else to meet, so that we can get a polished copy out to the members.
You mean,
Or
so
available to
we
the
can
public.
look professional,
Yes,
okay.
yeah,
No, I will say, I'm perfectly content, you know, a month or two, or whatever it is, before the town meeting, that we meet more frequently, so that as they get their business done, they can get in here and explain it to us and all that. That's perfectly fine.
and I think it's reasonable to expect, when you understand your volunteer status, that to get it accomplished, you have to put in this kind of extra time, and it's
Yep,
part
that's
of volunteering.
It's only twice a year, it's not the end of the world.
Right. Although it seems to be that night.
Okay, next on our agenda, approve the meeting minutes of October the 22nd.
Kelly sent those out, so I will make a motion to approve.
Second,
Motion's made and second to accept. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? It's a vote. Thank you. Any liaison reports? I'll couple that with other business, because there's a number of issues. With the school committee, did anybody, they had notice of the meetings that the school department was holding? One was yesterday, which was the all-day budget workshop and their budget hearing, which was similar to the one that we hold. And I had asked
usual.
Kim to forward us a schedule, thinking, well, if we knew what time particular departments are gonna be held, perhaps we hold an interest in that, we could make time for that or something. But she was unable to get one to me, so we didn't have any information. So I didn't go over, and they don't typically attend our meetings, so we had to attend theirs.
Well, we did have some attendees.
Yeah.
I've also,
Thank you.
let's see, they have a second one, which is that was November 6th, and I think I'm
December, I
confused
believe.
here. December 6th is the public hearing that is scheduled, and we are requested to attend, as are the selectmen, and the town administrator very specifically also. There was another one they mentioned here, let's see, November
29th.
6th. Yes, and I was confused as to what that one was going to be,
Budget.
since they already held their.
There is one, I think, next Thursday,
Mhm.
at which time the the office manager is going to present to the committee their end-of-year report, the one they file with the state.
Ah, that's the one I haven't gotten yet. I've been asked,
And that will be, I believe, next Thursday evening.
yes.
And it's not, then it will be available for us,
Mhm.
for anyone after that presentation.
Because I've been asking Sue for closeouts
She
of the
mentioned
accounts,
your name yesterday.
and she said she hasn't presented it to the school committee as yet. And the same, Derek already has his done, is complete, and he's gonna give that to me. Because I have a spreadsheet that goes back to fiscal 2012. That gives all the expenditures, final expenditures in the spreadsheet, and I've loaded all of the accurate, the latest figures, and I give us all a copy of it. Sometimes it's easier to see on paper. I mean, I'm sure we're all still part of a paper world than watching it on the screens. Okay, now that is on 7th, December 7th, in the auditorium, middle school auditorium. And of
Seventh,
course,
is it the 7th or the 6th?
December 7th,
Okay.
day in infamy. Then, of course, I'm sure it's news to all of us that they won their they vote yesterday on the schools, and they won it by a comfortable margin too, which is great. And in the wording of it, in this process now, the building committee, and it won't happen yet, but it will happen in the next month or two, the building committee, or the feasibility committee, as requested, created by the school department or school committee, morphs into, which will be the Deegest Elementary School at Minot Forest. And they become the building committee. This first committee was the feasibility. When they accomplished that task, which was getting approval of the $90 million borrow, and then the approval of actually building it. So then the committee morphs into that. But then the committee, based on the language and all in the article, because they now have the control of the $90 million. They don't have to go someplace else to get it authorized to expend that money. Town meeting has authorized that amount to be spent, and they control now the spending, that committee does. And,
Not the school committee?
pardon?
Not the school committee?
No. Because town meeting has authorized that directly. And the language in the article is very specific, that the committee has that money.
So the committee then worked with the contractor and gives the,
Yes.
okay.
As a matter of fact, the owner's project manager and Mount Vernon, which is the architect, their contracts are up. They were hired for the feasibility study. Town meeting appropriated $1 million back in the spring of 2016, and we hired them, and they went through that process. The OPM is the primary guide to get us through all the work graphs and obligations of MSBA requirements, and the architect designs the school satisfactory to the committee that conforms to all those requirements.
Bernie, what's the authority of this committee? Can they change what the school's gonna look like?
No, it's accepted now. The feasibility the committee has accepted it. Now the building committee has the responsibility of constructing it.
Now,
So it's
who's
just
that?
making sure that what's been agreed upon gets carried out?
Yes,
Okay.
It also goes to the state, for the state's approval also.
yeah.
Yeah.
The MSBA is still involved in monitoring it,
But
so there aren't any
but this
screw-ups.
committee doesn't have the authority other than to make sure what's been agreed upon gets carried out.
Mhm. If it requires some kind of changes, change orders, modifications, et cetera, because of what they find, the committee has the authority to make that decision. They also have, the project manager as well as the architect, their contract expires, so they have to go out to bid again. Now, it's possible, there's the option that they can continue. I think it's more prudent on a business perspective to go out to bid again. Now, obviously, the favorites would be those people who are familiar with the facilities.
You mean, we might get another architect at this point?
But understand, this particular architect has, let's say, drawn an outline of the structure. The next architect will construct that structure.
They've come up with a design, they don't have the building details yet.
Yep, I got it.
So Bernie, how many are on that building committee now, and who is on it?
There's approximately,
We don't have a building
30.
committee yet.
Or,
We
No,
have
we haven't.
feasibility.
we haven't morphed into that yet,
right,
but
well, then
there's about 30 plus,
30 plus.
yes. The dozen or so, first dozen are specific requirements of the MSBA as to who's there. It started out, Dave here was chairman of the finance committee. It was a requirement that his presence be there. Let's see, Dave from maintenance was there, police officer was there, law enforcement. There was also required a contractor, at least one or two people who were in the architectural field, as well, of course, principals of the schools. Various schools require the superintendent. She was designated as being chair, appointed by the school committee. That is a requirement, the initial requirement. Other people can, and also you have to have parent, at least one parent had to be there. a member of the PTA was on.
And then the other 20 were appointed or?
They volunteered, which is welcome on there, and it's the option of they can or cannot be voting members.
Okay. And are they voting members?
Yes, they're all voting members.
Well, I agree it should go out to bid, but it's hard for me to understand how somebody could do it for less, stepping in at this point as opposed to people who've been involved.
Well,
Be very difficult.
we had the original contract with OPM was for $240,000. I was on that committee, and then the OPM gets into negotiations with the architect, the winning architect, and they came up with, I think it was $500,000. So of $1 million, there's $750,000 has been spent.
Interesting process, to say the least.
It is, I was involved in a situation prior to it, and without the requirements of the MSBA, or you make the comparison, what you have is almost night and day. The actual members of the committee, they are more experienced, more capable, and more knowledgeable as to how the process should work. The committee I had to deal with, I wasn't on it, I had a different role, but they had to do it all themselves. They did the best they could. Unfortunately, they deteriorated into an enormous level of mismanagement. And we had to go in and rescue with the whole process and the like. Fortunately now with the MSBA, there is minimal possibility of that happening. And so it's a prudent expenditure of the millions of dollars involved.
Yep.
And the end product is much, much better quality. The borrowing that is gonna go on, I got a criticism by somebody that felt I wasn't on board, but I bring up the issue that we're borrowing, some $40 million, even though we're authorized to build it. We have to authorize the entire contract amount. We don't borrow for interest. So it's $40 million in interest. I forgot to ask Derek for clarification in it, but I believe it's gonna be absorbed within our operating budget.
Really?
There's no other source of the monies. We can borrow the $40 million, which accounts for building it, our share of building it, but you can't borrow for the interest. You don't borrow for interest. Interest comes out of your own pocket. So that's it. And how the borrowing will occur, I've talked to John, I talked to Derek. They haven't decided yet, but it's a possibility to go through with it. You would be familiar with a construction loan, which you borrow the amount of money you need, but you don't necessarily pay on the principal. You pay on the interest until you reach a point where it's done. Then you borrow the entire amount, and that's when you bond out. And what the interest rate would be, and how it's processed, we were talked briefly this morning with Derek and Alan was there. But depending on how we do it, could be a benefit to the town, but it depends upon the amount of revenues that we have available.
Yeah, I'd get the money as soon as possible,
Yeah.
because it's only going in one direction.
Well, that was the issue too. Of course, the interest rates are lower. We could borrow, let's say we borrow half the amount
Not as low as
now.
they were a couple of years ago, so
Hmm.
let's just
Right.
move forward.
Move forward with it.
Yeah,
We'll figure out how to pay it, but
yeah. I think, as I said, though, it depends what our revenues can sustain over time.
We can borrow other money though, can't we? I mean, wholly outside of this, the
Oh,
town itself.
Indeed,
Yes.
indeed.
Yeah, so I'd move as fast as possible. Interest rates are not going down in the foreseeable future, that's for sure.
Yeah, and that was discussed this morning. So everyone's very aware of the issue, and they're just trying to figure out now that they have authorization, what is the best process to go forward? We have to begin, Derek has to begin projecting revenues, because he has to pay the bills in 5 years down the road,
Yeah.
as well as
Okay.
all our contracts, labor contracts are up next year. Well, that was a deliberate effort to do them all at one time. Works out better long-term. And our tax rate, it remains split evenly between residential and commercial. And there was a discussion to go to a commercial and residential tax rate. but that, they didn't feel it would be, beneficial to the town. Doesn't make any difference, we can only raise so much money.
Right.
Period. So whether it comes from both residential evenly and commercial, or one pays more than the other, the end result is the same.
Is that discussion when that happens annually as to setting the tax rate?
Setting the tax rate,
Yeah. Or
Yeah.
that issue there between, the different rates between commercial and, residential?
yes, it comes up every year. It's an option the selectmen exercise every year when they set the tax rate, through the advice of, the assessor's office.
So they can just, the selectmen can make that decision?
Yes, that's their responsibility. And if they goof up, they have to write a personal check.
We don't set the tax rate.
Pardon?
We don't set the tax rate.
No.
Jackie does, doesn't she?
But you can
Oh, the
set-
state.
You can set the split, is what
No,
I'm saying.
we couldn't do the split, but the tax rate is done by DOR.
That's right, yeah.
Yeah, that's fine.
We submit the information, they set the tax rate.
We have to think about the split.
Based on request of the selectmen. I want to get them involved in this totally. And also the selectmen have stepped forward, they approved in concept, according to newspapers, a recreational marijuana license. And I believe that's the second one, isn't it?
Yeah, which one are you talking about now?
The one from,
The retail license?
pardon?
The retail?
Yes,
That's the third one.
oh, it is the third. And according to the paper, the agreement calls for giving the town a sum of $50,000 donation once the agreement is finalized, and pay Wareham a 3% of business gross revenues. That's pretty standard.
Gross revenues.
Yeah, I think some towns have gone above that, but I think they got their hands slapped.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
written
that's
into
the limit.
the regulations, isn't it, the law?
3% max,
Yeah,
which might get cut back by the state,
and we've been sued,
not yet,
well, they haven't filed it yet.
we haven't been served.
Have not been served yet?
Impending the Onset Bathhouse. And we had
Oh,
that 2 years ago. I think Rich Bowen, our counsel, gave a very well-researched explanation of what happened down back in 1916 or something like that.
What's the motivation for this?
They don't feel that we have the right, the
Well, I
town,
understand, but why are they objecting?
because we're trying to do things, the town is trying to do things on that property
Yeah.
that they feel, based on the original covenants, or,
I know, but they
Organization.
wouldn't be trying to enforce the original covenant if they didn't have some agenda. What is the agenda? They just don't want development of that?
Can't
Mhm.
discuss it,
yeah,
cannot discuss it.
yeah. He can't, because he's an attorney, not, excuse me, he's a town selectman, excuse me, Alan. I'll get it right yet.
Get their attention.
And I didn't get the article, but the 40B housing's been approved, so that's gonna go forward also. Anything else come to mind? Library was certified. That's great. They struggled with that for several years and they finally accomplished it.
They did it, that's wonderful.
It is.
Anything else anyone have up?
You covered the village soup very good.
I read it this morning.
Well, I,
We've got a question from the
oh,
audience.
yes,
We also discussed that we were gonna have by the first week in December, any articles that the Board of Selectmen wanna bring forward, we'll have to have them in place, ready to go to whatever department they have to go through.
outstanding.
So we don't have this hearings like a week before. So,
We had, the first part of our meeting was a discussion regarding those issues, and with,
Next door.
indeed, I would suggest that we meet with you, your board, and discuss those particular issues and what we could do to resolve them
No, that's what
in a
we've done.
cooperative level.
That's what we've done.
Outstanding.
Right,
Even though he was in the other room, he still heard us. Isn't that out?
No, but everything is taped. His microphone I would suggest as far as the lawsuit, that no town committee discuss it at all,
Good advice.
even though we haven't been served yet. If it goes out through that or through the newspaper, it could be damaging.
I think I just gotta research pass around the information of what the initial, formation of this whole area regarded, building lots, recreation, et cetera. And, just a background, probably go over to the historian in the library, she is excellent over there.
It was a very good discussion on Facebook about 2 or 3 months ago, where one of our selectmen was there and gave a very nice discussion on the history of Onset.
It's very interesting, very interesting. There being no other business, as far as the next meeting is concerned, I would speculate would be in January. And look for late January. So we look for something to, give them 3 weeks for something to occur that we have, worth us discussing.
Do we need a meeting to discuss the year-end financials with Derek?
To send it out first and
We
decide
look it
whether
up.
we wanna have a meeting.
Month and a half before January. Why don't I get them, send them out, and we'll leave it up in the air. If you'd like to get together and do so,
All right,
and if I could put everything together and we get a whole history of it, I'll try one of the old antique green bar reports.
fair enough.
Okay. If not, anything, I'll get the information out to you before I put it together. Waiting for me to do it would be time consuming, because sometimes I go through a cycle with my laptop. Every time we're on town meeting, it breaks down.
Mm-hmm.
Overworked and underpaid.
Pardon?
Overworked and underpaid.
That's it.
We are. In fact, this morning I spoke to Alan about getting a pay raise.
Yeah.
He said immediately after he gets one, I get one.
No, actually, it's double the thing that you write me a check.
Okey-doke, I'll have a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second?
Motion made and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
All right,
Aye.
Opposed? It's a vote. Thank you very much, gentlemen.
thank you.
Very good.